Who's ready for a contest? It's that time again. In fact, this contest is going to run all the way up until Thanksgiving, where you're looking at November 1st through November 17th. The deadline is November 18th. You need to join the podcast contest by the 18th to get put in. I don't care if you're a practitioner or not. All you have to do is leave a review on the podcast, subscribe to it, and then tell us you did that with the form inside the show notes below. I would love it if you'd also share it on social media too. That's a big help for us to reach other ears so more people can learn from this podcast just as you are doing. So once again, to get inside the podcast contest, you need to subscribe to it if you already haven't, leave a review, and then check the link in the show notes, and that will tell you how to give us your information so we know you did it, and then also for us to reach out to you. Now here are the winners. Out of everybody, we're going to give away not 5, not 10, but 15 signed copies of my book. From anybody who joins, we will be drawing 15 names. So you're going to need to leave your name, your email address, and your shipping address inside that contact information on our form below. You can find that form in the show notes. If you are a practitioner, you have a special grand prize available to you. Our next and final Master Bloodwork live event, like final as in possibly ever, final live event, is on December 13th. It is a Tuesday. Now there's going to be something special with this. We're going to do the live event where I teach you all of the blood work in 4.5 hours on December 13th from 1 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Set your date aside, mark your calendars, block off your schedule, no patients during that time. Same time next day, December 14th. We're going to spend it 2 hours on a special Q&A session at the same time. Then we'll take a 30-minute break. And then we're going to do something special, which I've never done before and I'm excited to do. We're going to together map out our 2023 plan. December 14th, that second 2-hour session. So December 13th and December 14th from 1 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Block off the date. There will be one grand prize winner from this podcast contest who will get to join for free. It'll probably be $1,200 because of the brand new portion, which I'm excited about. You're going to get that just like the regular price of this Master Bloodwork event. And again, this is the last time it's being ran live. So come join us December 13th and 14th. Block off the date. You'll get the registration link soon. Until then, join the podcast contest. Let's make sure more ears can hear this. And just, you never know. Maybe you will be the grand prize winner. Maybe a book, a signed copy of my book will show up on your doorstep. If you haven't grabbed my book yet, go grab it. It's on Amazon. Why Are My Labs Normal is the title. It'll teach you everything you need to know about blood work and more. All right. If you haven't started using or are using systemic formulas, you need to. Don't get their supplements from Amazon. They are counterfeit, as are many other of this quality. Grab them at systemicformulas.com and check out mybiome.com, MYBYOME. And let's get this party started. Welcome to the Beyond the Diagnosis podcast with me, Dr. Kylie. I have a very special international friend on with me today, Matty Lansdown. He hosts a big-time podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die. But today we're going to have a conversation that might open up some ears and give some special, different thinking to a hot topic. So, Matty, welcome on.
Thanks, Kylie. How have you been?
So good. So good. It's, dead of summer here. It's probably dead of winter where you are. But does it ever get winter?
Well, I mean,
like snow,
we're all conditioned
snow
to our
me
environment.
Is winter. That's what means winter.
Well, right now my computer says that it's 5 degrees, and for me, that's ridiculously cold.
Yes, that's cold. So Matty is from Australia. So if you are from Australia, good old Aussie land. We were going over some of the changes that Australia has experienced. And I've kind of stayed tuned to this, especially the last 2 years, because I'm a big tennis freako. And when the Australian Open happened, the number one player in the world was not allowed in because of the regulations. So let's talk about vaccines, Matty, and let's talk about your history and your experience on all aspects of the vaccine world.
Yeah, sure. So it's been a few years, but I worked as a vaccine formulation scientist for a year, and in the beginning of my scientific career when I was young and naive about the world of medicine and science, and I thought I was doing amazing work and doing great things, and because Melbourne actually produces 70 to 80% of the world's flu vaccines.
Oh.
We've got a huge vaccine facility, and on the same site, they also produce almost 100% of the world's antivenoms. So it all happens on the same location. And I remember how excruciating it was to start working there, because a new team was hired, and we had to sit in a room and just read SOPs for 3 weeks straight before we were even allowed in the facility, and just sign every single SOP, like standard operating procedures. Like, when you start a new job and you got to understand how they operate. And like some people quit during that 3 weeks, that they hated it. But anyway, there was just so much paperwork in order to even walk in the front door. And then, I was just a part of the team, and I learned about how vaccines are created, a little bit of vaccine history. And the interesting thing that sort of this moment possibly begun my dive down the rabbit hole to where I am today. But the professors that were working in the labs with us didn't have the flu vaccine each year. And I was like 22 at this point, right? So I'm just like, that's weird. Well, I went and got my free flu vaccine. Like, that's a bit strange.
The people who are in charge of creating the things won't get them. I love it.
Like, mind-blowing, right? And so I was just super confused. And remember, at this point, like, I was very much like, medicine is the greatest thing ever. The whole world has got all of these amazing hospitals and technology and drugs, and I didn't think that anything bad was coming from medicine. And it's not all bad, obviously, but
you're like in my shoes, because when I got introduced to chiropractic, I had no idea what the heck that even was. I had no idea functional medicine, herbs. Like, when we got sick, we just went and got an antibiotic. So that was the thing to do. So this world was so foreign to me. I honestly had no idea it even existed. And then I got into it, I'm like, holy smokes. Wait a second. I remember the first time someone said you should, be careful about the CDC recommendations for vaccine schedule. I'm like, well, why? Why do you need to be careful? They have our interests in their best needs,
Yeah,
Not
totally.
what I think now, but it's a journey.
The same for me, right? Yeah, like I used to work there, and then, we were talking before, it got to the point where me talking about some of this stuff is what likely led to me being deplatformed from Instagram, because of how I feel about those things now. And I think, it's concerning to know in any country that there is, if in Australia it was in 1986, that they brought in the pharmaceutical immunity legislation, which protects pharmaceutical companies from being sued for vaccines. And it's very, very difficult. In order to sue someone for an adverse event, you've got to sue the government first and challenge the legislation they put in place. And nobody has the money to do that. Like, nobody has the money to fight against someone that can print money. You know what I mean? And if you had a car and you got a new car, and within days or weeks or even years, you're on the highway, had a crash, the seatbelt failed, you would instantly go back to the manufacturer and be like, what went wrong here? Why did this happen? How can it be prevented in future? And the fact that you're not allowed to do that in the vaccine industry, just that alone should be massive red flags for everybody.
I remember when I learned that same thing here in the States. It is so difficult to see any recourse or get any compensation for a vaccine industry or a vaccine, what would you call it? Mistake or, something like that. And to even talk about mentioning, when people say, well, no, it wasn't the vaccine, there's no way it could possibly have been that. And even I'll say something, and my first response that people get, well, they had to remove that research. Vaccines don't cause autism. Okay, well, why was the research removed?
Yeah.
Did somebody hold a gun? I'm serious when I ask this question. Did somebody hold a gun at gunpoint and say, take that off, or, change your statistics or change the results of it, whatever it was? So again, this was a whole new concept to me. And I remember having my first little boy, my first child, and we were supposed to take him in for the, the regular wellness checkups. And I love my doctor. We know him very well. And I was just telling my husband, like the night before, Andrew, I can't do this. There's something so wrong about this. I can't do it. And he's like, well, then stick with your gut. So we went in, because I wanted to make sure he's growing. 2 weeks old, going well, but I haven't gone back since. Shh. And it's because the whole reason for wellness checkup is to get their vaccines. And they're not just giving
there's actual research that mentions that.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, there's actual research that says that the vaccine schedule for kids and this is old research, so it's, the narrative's possibly changed, but that says that the vaccine schedule in the beginning is to condition families and children to regularly showing up to a hospital or a doctor's clinic to embed that in their behavior in response to, any little cough or any type of, unwell event. And that's like the a psychological component of the conditioning of society to feel normal in doctors' clinics. Yeah, I read it. I read that years ago. It's old research from like the 70s maybe, but because the flu vaccine's been around for about 77 years.
Yeah,
like it's been around for a while.
I know. Growing up in teenage years, I got bronchitis and asthma and pneumonia. And so the flu was just a thing that was natural for us. Even in college, my nurse would save a flu vaccine for me when I came home for the weekend. She'd come to the house and give it. So it was just it was standard of care from growing up.
Yeah.
And it's nothing wrong about it. It's just, that's what we knew. So that's what we did. And then you start hearing about you and other practitioners who are getting kicked off social media platforms and getting shut up on Twitter or whatever it is. You're having to say to yourself, wait a second, there's more to this. This isn't just about my health and my safety.
Yeah. Well, I'm in groups on Telegram. I've signed, disclaimers in regards to stuff that I'm involved with, which has thousands of doctors, thousands of scientists from all over the world. Like, it's not just a couple of hippies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's monstrous numbers of medical professionals. And the big red flag for me is because, I worked on vaccines for a year of my life, and that probably qualifies me to understand the stuff more than 99% of the people in the world. But the stuff that really, really scares me is when you have vaccine scientists that have been doing it for 40 years, their entire career. They put their whole life, their whole livelihood, their family on the line. And what I really mean on the line, when you're up against, you're calling out pharmaceutical companies, some really dark stuff can happen. When they're like, you know what, I've been doing this job for 40 years and I'm saying this is concerning. I've read the research. I've been a part of some of this stuff. Do not do it. That's terrifying to me. It's like there couldn't be somebody that's more an expert in this field that's saying don't do it.
Which is why Joe Rogan's podcast had such issues, because heaven forbid somebody come in and with that background and oppose the narrative that they wanted told.
Well, I think one of the issues, we've got the internet now, so we can get different opinions out in the marketplace of, topics, that are on the internet. But because the background pre-internet and early internet days was that nobody really knew that this legislation to silence everybody came in the 80s, is that there's been a couple of decades of people not communicating really publicly about problems, adverse events, deaths, that it's become almost like a pseudo religion. Like if you mention anything that's like anti-vaccine, you're an anti-vaxxer and you're a hippie and you're a weirdo that believes in conspiracy theories. And I think that's simply because they were silenced from the mid-'80s onwards. And behind the scenes, though, as we know with, what's his name, the Kennedy son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's like one of the world's biggest vaccine scientists. And he's got a huge profile because obviously his dad was John F. Kennedy. And he is responsible for those monstrous fines that, many of those organizations have had to pay. He actively chases those companies down to punish them. So even though behind the scenes those things are happening, again, it's all in silence and secrets because of this legislation. So even if somebody did get a payout, you wouldn't know about it.
And by your experience and your research and your knowledge, what's the payout total been at this point? Do you know?
Oh, it's multiple billions.
And it's never in the media. It's like, why is Johnny Depp and Amber Heard? So why do we have to follow their story when there's really stuff going on that we really need to know? But let's cover that all up.
Totally. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. And the truth is that, if anybody feels a reaction to this information within themselves or feels triggered, you don't have to go far on Google. Use DuckDuckGo instead of Google because Google's highly censored. It doesn't take long to find this information, and it's in public records. Like you find it quite easily. Yeah. And it's just the fact that nobody goes looking for it, and the people that inform us also have never gone looking for it. They were just regurgitating what they were told to tell us.
Yeah. Yep. DuckDuckGo. I didn't know that was. I've seen billboards, but I didn't know was an actual search engine. Good to know.
Yeah, it's a search engine. Yeah.
Okay, so you were in the vaccine industry for a year. You got out. Tell us that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got out just because I wanted to do something more interesting, basically. So it wasn't like a huge act of rebellion at that point, but it definitely triggered that initial curiosity to be confused. Because ironically, my mum runs an immunization clinic.
That is funny.
Yeah, right. And so I was just kind of like, grew up knowing that we could just get mum to give us our vaccines to travel. And, probably in the year or two after that, I got a bunch of vaccines to travel, in my early 20s. And yeah, it was just like, of course this is okay. My mum's a nurse. She's a lecturer at a hospital, at a uni. And I was just like, not asking questions, but that was the beginning. And then I moved into a company that did nutritional epigenetics, which was super cool, working with athletes and customizing nutritional powders specific to their epigenetic metabolism profile, which was really cool, and just trying to get the most out of their metabolism, basically. And then from there, I ended up working in a cancer hospital for about 7 years, which was the rest of me waking up.
What happened there? When you say the rest of me waking up, please do share.
Everyone's like, listen to this hippie.
No, so there's a lot more of us than we think. We just have to keep our mouth shut because, again, we get shut down on Instagram. But on the podcast, feel free to say whatever you want.
Totally. And maybe it's the opposite, we just need to all talk more and be like, oh, there's more people like me out there. And I had a lot of people reach out on social media that were like, thanks for having the courage to say something, because I feel exactly the same. Even colleagues in the beginning of this, and Melbourne was like the most lockdown mandated city in the world where I am now. In the beginning, people thought I was crazy. I literally quit my job at the hospital because I said, in a year, this is going to be about vaccine mandates and forced vaccination. And my colleagues laughed at me. The doctors, professors, everybody laughed. They're like, this is Australia. That won't happen. And then a year later, it happened.
The worst in the entire world.
Yeah, totally. And I even had a few friends that were nurses that were working on COVID wards that thought I was a crazy idiot, basically. And then a year later, I heard from two of them. And they basically were like, Matty, you know what? I think you're right. We've been in these wards for 18 months at this point, and it's not as crazy. We're not overrun. The hospital's actually really quiet. It has been the whole time. And it was when I was there. So I was there for the first year, 2020, and a fellow doctor and I, who both no longer work at the hospital, we were essentially walking through the emergency department doing Facebook Lives. Because the news was there in the day filming, being like overrun, and they were like getting people to lie in beds so it looked busy. And then we would do Facebook Lives to be like, so there's literally nobody here. This is the quietest we've ever seen it. My professor said it's the quietest he's ever seen it in 35 years. And that was the first year, 2020. And so actually that led to me getting a call from HR and my doctor friend,
I'm sure,
being threatened with a $60,000 fine. And he had to deregister as a doctor to avoid paying that fine, because we did Facebook Lives basically proving that the news narrative was wrong.
They made him like basically revoke his license.
Well, he chose to do that so that he didn't have to incur the fine. Yeah.
But it was either that or they're going to force him to pay. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that was fun. But anyway, working at the
at least you had a partner in crime. It wasn't just like you solo acting. You were actually doing it with someone together. Yeah,
well, there was a few of us in the hospital, but not everybody had the courage to, because people have got mortgages and people have got families and kids to feed, and I don't have a mortgage and I don't have kids, and so I've been to about 26 protests at this point. I've been arrested just simply for being at a protest. I sued Victoria Police for $3.4 million. I didn't get the money, but I represented myself in all 5 cases and won. If you stand up, do the homework, it's actually easier than it sounds to win, because this stuff is illegal. A lot of this stuff is illegal. It's just, you got to put in the man hours to learn how the law works, which is, again, I've got the time to be able to do that.
The time, but you also, one, you're an entrepreneur, so you dare to break free of the system. And 2, you have the scientific background to know that this is more than just, quote, keeping us healthy.
Oh, absolutely. Well, part of my evidence that I took into court and submitted to the court, which is now, in court for anybody to leverage on new cases, was freedom of information from the TGA. So the TGA is the Australian equivalent of the FDA. And so I literally have freedom of information stuff where the TGA signed by their CEO that says we can't identify COVID. We can't pull it out of a PCR. We don't know where we would find it if we went looking for it. Like, I've got a bunch of this information that I submitted to the courts, because I didn't just say I shouldn't have been arrested. I said I went all layers of the system. I even put in there criminal charges against our premier. And so it was hectic. Like,
you haven't been kicked out of the country yet?
Well, I was a part of a group of people that were doing it. So, everybody was sort of coming at all angles. And every single one of us won. Because these, it's like the media and the news is masquerading as the law. And it's like, actually, if we pull the law books out, none of that stuff's allowed to be enforced.
Okay, I want to know what you know. And I want you to share everything you know about the last 2 years, because I guarantee you and I are on the same page.
I'm pretty sure. Well, I guess I also want to be careful with the words I know, because I'm aware that it's possible that I don't know, and I'm aware as well that I might have a bias within myself to, believe that it's all bad and evil. And so I really want to acknowledge that bias, because I think we all have it to some degree. And the reality is, do I know? No, I'm not. I wasn't in China. I wasn't in the labs. I wasn't hanging out with Fauci having these conversations. So do I know? I don't. But do I have, can I add up an equation like 1 + 1 + 1 and does it equal 3? Well, I think so, So I guess for me, what was really concerning is in the beginning, I was totally on board. March 2020, I fully put up a video on my social media, which got 800 shares, where I was explaining what a virus is, foods that you can eat and different things you can do. And I did this, it was like 40 minutes. It was really thorough. It got shared everywhere that I ended up 2 weeks later deleting, because I was like, oh, I've been tricked here. And I guess, for me, it just didn't make much sense that, a pandemic. Well, firstly, if we go back to 2008, I think it was, they changed the definition of pandemic, over a decade ago. to basically be a standard flu season. The words were very flexible and very interpretive, and it used to, the previous definition involved the words significant mortality in order for a pandemic to occur. And those words were taken out of the definition. I think it's in 2008. And so that means basically that a pandemic can just be a group of sick people, which is pretty vague. So that's the first thing of concern, because now we're not calling a spade a spade. We're basically calling it something else. Yeah. And so anyway, at that point, I was just kind of like, is enough people sick and enough people dying? And then as time ticks on, especially here in Melbourne, Australia, or all of Australia, so Melbourne was the most locked down, which they say is why we had such a good experience. The rest of Australia wasn't. Their experience was better. So, yeah, for me, it was like...
Melbourne is where the Australian Open takes place, right? Like that is the place of the tennis tournament. Okay.
Yeah, totally. Where they had the tennis and had nobody in the crowds.
Mm-hmm. And even the best player in the world wasn't allowed to step foot in because he refused to get the vaccine. So props to him.
Yeah.
And even Wimbledon, absolutely. He won't be at Wimbledon on Monday. Well, today is Monday. Right now is Wimbledon, and he is not there because he refuses to get the vaccine. Good for him. Yeah,
good on him. Like for standing his ground and putting his ego to win aside. Like that's powerful.
Best player in the world now and in history. Like he refuses to join.
Well, here they had there was big protest. Is he
Novak Djokovic?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Croatian?
He's Slovakia.
Slovakia. Yeah. So there was massive protests outside the hotel that he was in, with like just a sea of flags from, I guess, Slovakia, and like it just got no airtime on the news at all. And they were just like a couple of hundred people, and it was like thousands and thousands. And I've been to a bunch of protests where I've then, supporting
him, trying to get him in. Okay.
Yeah, it was all of the same people that I knew and had met at protests against these mandates, and that's the thing too that I think is different is that the people that feel uncomfortable about this stuff are against it. We're actually not anti-vax at all. We're just like, let me decide for myself and you do whatever you want. The other side is not just pro-vax. They're like, let's force vaccines into everybody. So it's like, they look at us as the crazy ones, but it's like, I think you're more tyrannical than we'll ever be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're just saying, I just want a choice. That's all. Give me a choice. Yeah. And that's been taken and removed from the world for the last 2 years. And it's those of us, again, just like yourself, wait a second, now you're going to have to you're forcing me to shut up. You're forcing me to not live my life, to lose my job and the way I put food on the plate, on my kids' plates, because you're eliminating my choice. Yeah.
Well, here in Victoria, just recently, so the mandates that are still progressively being removed, and I think it's teachers and hospitals still have mandates, but the day that everything opened up, 2,500 teachers in my state lost their job because they hadn't had the third vaccine. And so we've got a lot of like really weird scenarios like that where it's like we seem to make progression out of the problem that's been around, but a heap of people lose their jobs because, there's this situation. So we've got, they're like, hospitals are overrun. Oh my God, it's crazy. And it's like, well, maybe the 4,000 nurses that you just fired could be pretty useful and your hospital wouldn't feel overrun. And the funny thing about overrun hospitals is a lot of the stuff on the media was like, hospitals are overrun, and they'd interview nurses and doctors that are like, we're ready for a capacity of 2,000 patients a day. It's going to be crazy. And the other thing is, during this time, people's ego got real, like doctors and nurses were like, oh, this is my time to shine. Like I got to be on the news. And so that means that their ego attaches to the story even more. And in 2020, so all of 2020, I remember sitting in a meeting just before I resigned in December, and no doctor in the room, including myself, knew anybody that had COVID. Not only did none of us know people out in the world, in Melbourne's biggest hospital, nobody knew someone that had COVID. And everyone was just talking like, I was mind blown because everyone was like, it's really scary that COVID's out there. And I literally just said, has anybody treated anyone with COVID? And everyone's like, oh, no, but I've heard of a brother's friend's sister. And I'm like, we're in the biggest hospital a year deep into this pandemic, and nobody knows anybody with COVID. And I didn't know anyone until COVID, until mid-2021. And that was the same, like, slowly people started getting it, but it was very few people.
The testing is such BS that I tell people, like, you could flip a coin and they could say, oh, well, you have COVID. Again, no testing, no PCR test has identified the freaking virus. You can't separate it from it. So what are they testing? What were they testing? Because we're now out of it, thank heavens. But it was like the status, at least here in the States. I had COVID. I have COVID. Like, it's like the status, to say, oh yeah, you have it. Now you've overcome it. And in my household, my husband and I are different. We probably would go very long, get along very well with you. We get sick, and he's like, oh, I swear I have COVID. I said, and I would say, I don't give crap what you think you might have.
Totally.
I am not shutting my life down for 2 weeks because, heaven forbid, I have a little cough. I don't even care if you want to call it COVID, if that even thing exists. Like, that's now just, it's like the status to say, I had it.
Yeah.
I have it.
Well,
and I just refuse to even give it any credit.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Like, and I got a little bit sick for a week recently for the first time in years, because the first few years in the hospital, I got really sick almost once a year because something would finally get into my system, and then basically it made me bulletproof. I haven't been sick for years thanks to the exposure in the hospital. And I got sick just recently, and all of my friends that know, how I feel about this were like, oh, has Matty Lansdown got COVID? Do a test. Like, and I was sick for a week, and I was like, I have been wiped out for weeks from stuff that I picked up at the hospital, like really wiped out. And this, I was like, maybe 3 or 4 days, I was a bit like, I don't want to do anything. But yeah, I've had so many worse scenarios, which, in my experience is not going to be everybody's experience. Maybe COVID is their worst experience, and that's okay. But again, not many people are dying. The elderly, the severely sick and obese, that's the same group of people that die no matter what infection they get, and so it's the vulnerable that get sick from anything. And the reason those numbers might go up, in my opinion, is because we're neglecting the fact that in 2022, we've got more overweight people, more people with terrible diets, more people that are dying younger, and we're saying, oh, this virus is killing more people. And I'm like, hang on, the people that it's killing are the vulnerable, and that group of people is growing significantly due to the food industry, the toxins we're exposed to in this world, the stress that we run our lives on in 2022. The last few decades have been absolutely catastrophic to the biological system. From a food perspective, and sugar and vegetable oil, it's now strange to be the skinny friend. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? That's a healthy body weight. 40 years ago, it was strange to have an overweight friend, and so the numbers might be very different if this happened in the 70s, because everybody was a healthy body weight and had low inflammation and that type of thing. And the other thing is that really is a red flag for me is that flu numbers, like the actual flu, went to zero. Literally went to zero, and our health minister was quizzed on it, and he was like, how fantastic, the flu's gone to zero. And then you look at the COVID numbers, and they're on par or in the ballpark of normal flu numbers. So it's like, is this a rebranding event to get a new vaccine? Because sooner or later, the COVID and the flu vaccine will come as one shot, right? They've even started advertising them on our news here as the super shot. Get your super shot, you'll only have to get one. And it's a concoction of vaccines.
Which is scary. That's scary because you don't have research to back up concoctions.
Yeah, exactly. So I think all these things are majorly concerning. And the more that we take the capacity for the immune system to practice being an immune system, the weaker the human body gets. We need it to be stimulated. We need to get sick. We need to fight these infections naturally. Because the other thing is, even let's say, a vaccine is perfectly healthy and amazing. Just simply putting a needle in your arm, that's not how you would receive it. You haven't trained your nasal passage to have its immune response and to do the things that it needs to do, or your lungs. And so even the method of consumption of that particular thing is not totally accurate. You don't get a cold because you got a needle in your arm. It doesn't go into your bicep type thing. So there's lots of reasons why it's not helpful, which is not me saying that vaccines are a bad idea. It's just that I don't think a COVID vaccine is necessary for virtually anyone.
Well, especially if it doesn't even exist. I was thinking about this last night, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because I've gone away from this topic. I just didn't want to be that another person talking about it on this podcast. And I shared one episode probably a year ago. And when I found, it's like, okay, fine, I've had enough. This is my opinion of it. This is my view. And I had more people thank me for that. I don't even think I had one negative response from it. I had so much popularity from it. And I'm looking back in the history books thinking, in 30 or 40, 50, 60 years, what's going to be said about 2020 and 2021 in the history books? And a lot of it will depend on who writes it. If you write it or I write it, all I need is 2 letters, BS. But if someone else writes it who's bought into the fear mechanism, that's going to be a different story.
Well, I remember I heard a quote years ago which kind of melted my brain when because I'm really interested in history, and I think understanding history is how we actually make positive movement forward. And one of the things that humans are not very good at is remembering history, because a lot of things repeat, and I think a lot of people have an arrogance about the fact I'm alive now, so this must be the best time to be alive, and nobody's ever been smarter. And that's another thing I realized that working in the cancer hospital is that I got to a point where I realized knowledge isn't linear. We assume that just because we've been around longer that we know more than all the cultures before us that ever existed. And I think, in a situation where we forget history, we're likely to repeat it. But this quote that I was told was that history is what the winners wrote. And that melted my brain, because I'm like, every war that's ever happened or any empire that's ever existed, the history books that were written were just their perspective. And that's exactly what will happen here. The pharmaceutical companies, Bill Gates and all his mates, they're going to be the ones to write the history books, right?
So they'll just keep instilling the fear in us all.
Yeah.
All right, y'all.
Yeah, totally.
Matty can be found at mattylansdown.com. But also, as you can keep listening to him on his brilliant podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die, on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Matty, I do have one question for you. This is more for practitioners. If you were to lose everything, like your practice, but still have the knowledge in your head, what would you do differently in your chapter 1?
From a business
perspective.
Oh, I already tell people this all the time that are like, oh, I've got a new health coaching certification, or I want to start a business. I would stay as far away as I can from social media, and I would go straight to advertising. The reality is the algorithm is designed to work against you. These platforms work because, when a platform is free, you are the commodity. So make the platform not free so you can get the best of it. So if you pay to play, that's the reason Facebook exists, TikTok exists, because they get money from advertisers. So advertisers like us are the people that they really want in order to run their, monstrous corporations. So and the other thing is the algorithm changes all the time. You get no data on that. That's behind the scenes. Whenever you run an ad, you get extremely detailed amounts of data so you can see where your pipeline's not working, where it is working, because a lot of people think, like if you put a post up, the post wasn't very good. Maybe it just didn't land in the right people's lap. Whereas when you've got an ad and you put that same post up, for instance, you might see that it is reaching the right people, but they're not engaging with it, or that it's not converting, or the cost of your lead or your acquisition cost. I just think I would from day one master advertising, because I've spent plenty of money trying to pay coaches and different people to help me with social media organically, only for it all to change within the next 6 to 12 months.
And Google SEO is the same thing. I had a colleague tell me, well, why don't you just fix your Google SEO? And I said, ask Dr. Axe about that. Because Dr. Axe 3-4 years ago used to be the top person on every single health related question. Now, because of the Google analytics have changed, You don't get any of Dr. Axe unless you include him inside the title. So you're brilliant. And to think, when we're all like, let's get on social media, no, that's a lot of time consumption. You and I were talking about this beforehand. Like,
Yeah.
I need to pay someone to create the content for me. Or should I? Now that you got me thinking, or should I just go for the sponsored ads that I know are going to be guaranteed to get in front of people's eyes?
Well, and the other thing about the ads is that instead of like talking to people on social media that don't really know they're going to be sold to by you, is that if someone responds to an ad, they've literally said, I know I'm going to be sold to, please sell to me. Like, it's the dynamic of the conversation is so much better.
What's your favorite platform to run ads on?
Facebook ads is where I'm at the moment, and that's because I've got a Facebook group that sort of looks after many of my people, which is called the Busy Mums Collective. So it's just the platform that's worked. And going back to what you said about the time consumption of being on social media, it's funny because when I got deplatformed from Instagram, there was like 24 hours of panic of like, oh my God, I'm not on Instagram. People are going to think I'm a fraud. People are going to think I'm
that's
like
the brilliantness, is that you're not there because you've been kicked off, which means you're onto something.
Well, after that first 24 hours, I was liberated. And ever since, I've felt no desire to download Instagram. Everyone says, are you going to do it again? And I'm like, no, I feel free. This is great.
So, and that's what I've been the last 3 months. And because I've really just turned off my social media, where I used to be on TikTok every flipping day, and I'd have videos going viral and, 60,000, 100,000, 500,000, million views on in the blink of an eye. And it just became so much. And it consumed not only me, but then it consumed, my relationship with my kids, because now I'm having to respond to comments on while I'm sitting at the park with them and not actually being with them. There's things like that. So I gave myself mental permission to not go onto the social media as far as content production, because it's just a rabbit hole to run down. So
Joe Rogan famously doesn't look at comments. Like, everybody knows that about Joe Rogan,
Yeah.
And he doesn't care. He's just like, I prefer my happiness.
Yeah. And I tell people, a lot of practitioners are like, hey, I want to get on TikTok. And I just say, be careful, because people on TikTok are ruthless. They don't care who you are. They don't care what they're going to say. They're just going to say it. And so if you don't have thick skin, don't get on there. Or you create your content and then you just let it go. You let it do its thing, and people who resonate with you will come to you and work with you in other ways. But I feel like you just gave me permission to not do social media and to focus more on my time and my energy on an ad.
Yes.
Where I've reached that platform now, and I hired one of the best ad coaches in the world, Rudy Moore. He's he's actually Australian. I don't know if you've heard him.
No, I haven't.
He's from Australia. He now resides in Florida. But he has that same accent too, which I love. And so I hired him to run my Facebook ads, and we haven't started yet because he's brilliant too, because he's like, I'm not going to run a Facebook ad for you and promise all this back end stuff if I know your back end sucks. So now he goes through the funnel, and we do copy, and we create, we go through the entire back chain before we even get to the ads, which we're about to do. So talking to you just made me even more excited.
Genius. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Because, of course, an ad's not the silver bullet, but I just think, if you learn ads, which will take time and it'll take a little bit of money.
And it might take someone an expertise. Like, I would say before the iOS changes, the 14 changes, you could run an ad. Like, I could jump on and I could throw $500 in an ad or whatever, and it would be fine. But now it scares me, and I'm like, oh, I need to find someone who really knows this, so I can maximize the dollar, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You obviously run that ad for yourself, and you know all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. I would say I'm still in the learning phase, but it's just the type of people that you attract. It's just people that have responded, they've given permission for communication. And obviously there's different types of ads, right? There's like, download my free PDF, or there's like really direct, which is like, this is my offering. Do you want to buy it? And I kind of prefer those, because even though it's a harder sell, like, the people that respond to that ad are like, I know what you're offering and I know how much it is and sign me up. And I'm like, I like those people.
Yeah, you do. And Rudy's was the same way. This is how I got connected with him. This is for all your practitioners listening. Some of the business stuff that Matty and I do. His Facebook ad, I swear, was always every time I pulled up Facebook, which is like the only platform I'm on personally, from a personal standpoint, was always in my feed. And so I just had that, like gut feeling, like you need to click on this. You need to, so I clicked on it and I got out and didn't do anything because it was a paid thing. Like you had to do $97 done for you funnel kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I clicked on it again 2 weeks later. Like I just got that feeling, you need to do this. Okay. So I click it. $97 turned into $60,000 in one phone call.
Oh.
See? The ads you're running are the exact ads he's running. But the reason why is because I wanted the results. I didn't want to pay for like, a couple $100 services or just to get kind of minuscule results. No, I want the results. So I'm going to go all in. And I encourage you practitioners to think, instead of meeting your patients at the level that they're wanting to come in and pay, the $300 or I just want supplements. No, force them to level up. And if they really want the results, get them in that ultimate package where they're going to get the results.
Yeah, absolutely. All
right. That's my 2-piece sentence.
I like it.
Go follow Matty on his podcast. It's called How to Not Get Sick and Die. Go to his website, Matty Lansdown, MattyLansdown.com. Thank you so much, Matty. I'm going to go follow your podcast right now, actually. I don't know why I haven't done that, but I haven't yet.
Yeah, you're on it.
I know. So I'm going to go follow it right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie.
November 18th. That's the day the podcast contest ends. You need to join it. To join this podcast contest, all you have to do is subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Then jump over to the link in the show notes and let us know you did that by sharing some information. There will be 15 people who will get a signed copy of my book headed to them at their house, and one grand prize winner who will be a practitioner who can come join our final Master Bloodwork live event on December 13th with a twist this time on December 14th. So block out the dates, 1 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern, both days. We'll do all the blood work on the 13th. We'll have a Q&A on the 14th. And then we're going to sit down for 2 hours together and map out our plan for 2023. It's going to be powerful. 9 hours total. Come join me. December 13th and December 14th. One grand prize winner. Everybody else, you can still come. Let's do this. Why? We're in this together. If you haven't started using the supplement company Systemic Formulas and MyBiome in your practice, you need to. If you're someone who just wants to take incredible supplements, these are your things. In fact, I only recommend the best because you're wasting money if you're not. Usually they're junk, and you're not going to get anywhere if they're not really good quality supplements. Systemic Formulas and MyBiome will give you everything you need. Go visit their website at systemicformulas.com and MyBiome, MyBiome. Visit their website. If you are a practitioner, come join me inside their private Facebook group for practitioners called Systemic Formulas Clinical Nutrition. And don't forget, In This Together Live with me is happening February 20th, 21st, and 22nd of next year in Orlando, Florida. You can now register. Get the special early bird pricing and get the link to do that below. And I'll see you live and in person. And I'll probably give you the biggest hug in the world. February 20th, 21st, and 22nd, Orlando, Florida. See you in a few months.